all degrees and all sciences at university. So it is with great pleasure that I'd like to moderate this session and invite, with no further ado, the first speaker, who is Dr. Thabo Msibi. You have his resume, so you can read it.
Thank you. Colleagues, good afternoon. I'm very honored to be speaking to such an esteemed audience, and to actually pay tribute to a man that I think I owe much gratitude to, who is Professor Makgoba. I think Professor Troyes, is it? Yes, has sort of started a very interesting engagement, which is sort of my passion around gender issues as well, because there is a narrative around transformation that seeks to dominate, that is sort of a racializing project alone, and often we tend to ignore the other aspects of transformation, and I'll speak to that towards the end. And I think for Professor or Dr. Van Jaarsveld, I think having had Professor Makgoba laying the ground, this now will become, I would hope, something that you'd have to pursue moving forward for the institution. I want to speak about four things in relation to my own reflection of engaging, perhaps from a distance, with Professor Makgoba. One is around the sort of the deliberate pursuit of racial transformation and perhaps gender transformation through policies and change of structures. The second is the deliberate pursuit of a knowledge project, which many people have actually spoken about here today. Another is dignifying blackness. And finally, a personal touch from my own reflective account as to the contribution that Professor Makgoba has had in my own personal life. And then I will end off by discussing briefly what I think ought to happen moving forward for the institution. Just to say, I came to UKZN, not UKZN, in fact, to the University of Natal in 2002, back then. And I arrived in the then Faculty of Education, which had just recently merged, not merged, but incorporated to the University of Natal, because it used to be the Edgewood College of Education. And in Edgewood, or at Edgewood, I would say that about 80% of the student population was white, 10% black, and the remaining 10 being Indian and colored. And as I stand today, the student population has almost been inverted completely. It's almost 80% black and about 15% Indian and about 5% white, I think. My statistics may be wrong. In saying that, as I was thinking about the talk today, when I came from Escort, a very small town in the Midlands, and I had no idea about politics of race, because I grew up in an environment where issues of race were never actually discussed. I went to a previously Model C school, and we were taught to aspire to be white. So I aspired to be a white person, and I associated whiteness with excellence. So when I arrived here, and I became SRC president in 2002, towards the end of 2002, and there was this hastily organized affair to go and meet the new VC, who happened to be Professor Makgoba, this towering figure who's eloquent, outspoken, and speaking about access to students, about transforming the institution. And this was for the first time in my life that I'd engaged with somebody who was black like me and who was speaking a completely different narrative to the narrative that I'd heard. And I think the effect, I think that is what Professor Siepe was talking about earlier, the effect of internalized racism on black people is something that a transformation agenda must seriously look at. I think it's something that we continue, and it's still actually harboring on in many institutions across the country. One of the things that I want to say about Professor Makgoba's approach, which I think has been key to the transformation that we have seen in this institution, is the fact that the transformation was pursued concurrently with the change of policies and the change of structures. And I think because of that, there was a stable foundation from which to actually argue for transformation. What we see happening in the country across many institutions is that we see individualized approaches where VCs are taking this mantra on and they're trying to fight, but nothing is there on paper. Or nothing is there in terms of structure. There are no structures that are there to support this transformation movement. And I think what worked for the University of KwaZulu-Natal was that there was this deliberate effort to try and ensure that the structures changed and that the policies also changed. Of course, when that happened, there was a massive reaction, a huge reaction, and at Edgewood we saw it physically because anybody who was associated with Professor Makgoba then started being attacked. I remember sitting at this one meeting, and unfortunately, poor Professor Vita was the Dean of Education at the time, and Professor Mazibuko was a DVC at the time, and there was a planned, orchestrated move to oust the Dean because the Dean was in support of Professor Makgoba's transformation policies. And we sit in this faculty board, and this individual who has worked tirelessly for weeks to try and convince staff to launch this coup, launches this coup in front of everybody. And I mean, I think what really worked was that because the policies were already in place, because the structures were already in place, that there was then that Professor Vita was able to be protected, and therefore Professor Mazuko came in quite strongly to say, this will not happen, you will not remove a sitting dean simply because you want to pursue your own interests. So I think thinking about transformation, we must also think about structures. We must also think about policies. Secondly, this notion of a knowledge project, I think, is absolutely key. We have heard about, the isiZulu project that has been driven, but I want to speak about this issue of the PhDs that people have also been sort of speaking about, because I recall Professor Makgoba's first meeting at Edgewood again, and at that stage I was still a student, so I was not part of this board meeting that occurred. But boy, people who came out of that meeting were up in arms because the VC had told them that they were in the wrong place because they did not have PhDs, and they were rejected. They were actually fighting against us, notion they must have PhDs. The argument was that we are educators. How dare you expect us to have PhDs because we should be teaching? That is our primary aim, to teach. The PhD agenda has, in fact, in a way, dignified the transformation agenda, because it has drawn on this idea that you cannot just challenge me on a position of ignorance. You have to challenge me on a position of knowledge, what Professor Vita was talking about earlier. So what we have seen, again, I'm reflecting on a colleague who shared this with me, a young black guy, 29, recently got his PhD, is in the School of Education, Pumlane Miende, a friend of mine. The VC, he doesn't know this, but 2.5 years ago, Pumlane went and registered for his PhD at the University of the Free State. And the VC did not know that Pumlane had gone and registered at the University of the Free State. And of course, Professor Vithal's emails that she was talking about arrived, telling Pumlane that he has to go and get the PhD ASAP. To which case Pumlane tried to plead his case, and the response from the VC was, stop pussyfooting around the area and go and get that PhD done. Now, Pumlane graduated with a PhD 2 years later because the VC pushed him to do it. So there is, even though, and one of the things I've learned is that sometimes we want to hear nice things and we don't want to hear the truth. And when we hear the truth, it hurts. And I think Professor Makgoba alluded to this, to his medical training. And I think sometimes if you are pursuing a transformation agenda, you have to have an uncompromising disposition, in moving forward. That's the only thing that can get things moving. Thirdly, I want to speak about this dignifying of blackness, because I think it's absolutely important. Over the weekend, I was shocked. I think it's Cheyenne from the University of Cape Town. She wrote an article on what UCT will not tell its first-year students. And in that letter, she writes that UCT has 48 out of 1,405 academics. 48 of those academics are black. 48 out of 1,405. Then we must ask a critical question. What does this mean for a transformation agenda 21 years after the collapse of apartheid? That we've got institutions that have less than 10% of their staff are black. I mean, that is a serious concern. What has happened in this institution is that we as black academics have been given a sense of dignity, that we can pursue excellence and pursue it uncompromisingly and be able to say, it doesn't matter that I am 32, I am a senior lecturer and I can be a professor at 32 because I have what the promotion document requires. And I think it's a very important thing in that it's shifted the way in which black people have been perceived. There has been this notion of black failure circulating in academic spaces. Now that we've got this evidence to say, actually, some of these things that you've been saying are problematic, and here's the evidence, here are the facts, we are seeing a change in the climate of the country. I want to say thank you, Professor Makgoba, for making a person like me motivated about higher education and about pursuing excellence. I want to thank you for showing us that we as a black academic staff, and in fact black students, have a voice, and that we're going to be heard, and that in this institutional space we're going to be given opportunities that we should be given. But having said that, Prof, having said that, I want to say that there are many other things that we need to think about, and I think perhaps Professor van Hersveld has to take this forward. And you see I'm giving him a professor title already, which he already had because, you know. You know, there has been at UKZN a deliberate effort to extend access. And over the years, as I said, we've seen an increase in the number of black students across our campuses. The question I have, though, is, in terms of providing this access, what have we done to facilitate our students to be able to have this education and complete it within that 4-year period? In other words, what resources have we put in to support the poor students that we are drawing in? I know the institution is doing a lot, and I know this is a national crisis, but unless we address this, we are going to have a failed institution and a failed nation. You know, there are serious concerns that relate to students not having funding, not because they don't, I mean, not paying their fees, not because they want to not pay their fees, but it's because of the history that our students come with. And I think as a country and as a university, we need to be reflective about this. Secondly, we have not dealt with quite seriously the issue of intersectionality of identity when it comes to transformation. So we speak about issues of race, we speak about issues of gender, but all of these are quantifiable, and I'm not trying to say quantity is bad. What I'm trying to say is that we need to also have a qualitative analysis as to what is happening on the ground. In other words, how does sexuality, race, class sort of contribute to the ways in which the institution is experienced? We haven't really deliberately focused on those things. We're thinking about quantity in terms of what we've done to transform the system, but I think we need to start speaking about how is a life of a working class black student who's female from deep to rural Nkandla different to that of a student who is from a middle class black environment from Morningside and who's male? I mean, how are their experiences shaped by the institutional culture and the institutional space? And what facilities have we put forward to ensure to it that our students are included? The other important thing is around the issues of sexuality and the ways in which institutions operate in whether silencing issues around sexuality or actually allowing them to exist. And I think I want us to have a critical reflection about what message is UKZN pursuing in relation to issues of transformation in terms of sexuality. How are we reacting to matters that relate to homophobia in our institutional spaces, or are we shutting them down? I think this is an important point that is going to move our institution forward. Thank you very much.
Your talk was becoming really interesting, and we had to stop. Right, and the next speaker is Professor McCracken.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I have to say from the beginning that I'm a professional historian, and I like my subjects to be dead before I speak about them. As they used to say in Ireland, 6 feet under for 6 years. But I'll make an exception. I'd like to just start by saying a word about Durban Westville, because I was touched by what Betty Govender down at the back said before lunch. because it was true, it was accurate. What came out of the Salisbury Island was not rubbish. There were people of integrity and standing and academic worth there. And indeed there were at Durban-Westville. And whilst it is true that Durban-Westville, everything that anyone said about Durban-Westville was true, they forgot to say the other bit. And I was a dean there for 10 years. I had 10 deputy vice-chancellors above me in that period when I was dean. First World War air pilots survived longer than deputy vice-chancellors at Durban-Westville. But nonetheless, there was something about Durban-Westville that was special and that was different. And there was a degree of transformation that existed in that university which didn't exist in a great many other South African universities. By the mid-1990s, 60% of the humanities student body was African, 30% Indian, and 10% were white. Because of the historical inheritance, whites also were not in a majority on the staff. But most significant was the attitude, and Ramila Bob may support me in this, at least I hope she'll support me in this, was the attitude towards transformation that existed from the time that J. Ram Reddy took over as the Vice-Chancellor there. And he brought in a new cohort of what one can only describe as heavy thinkers, intellectuals, whatever you want fancy word you want to use. Marla Singh, who I think is now on our council, was one of them, Percy Morey, John Daniel, Irina Filatova, John Butler Adams. There was a whole bunch of them that came in. But even amongst the rest of us, the canaille that was beneath them, there was a sense of community and a commitment to change, which is, I'm afraid, not universal amongst some of my colleagues at UKZN today. So progress we've made, yes, but there were things in the past that were also good. UDW would not have been broken-hearted if the merger hadn't taken place, but when it became inevitable, I think they accepted it. If nothing else, real politique existed on that campus. Okay, the merger took place, and the decision by Professor Makgoba to shift the headquarters of the executive from Howard College to Westville campus was important and significant. No one's mentioned it today, but I think it was one of the key decisions that was taken that was good. So that as the capital of India shifted from Calcutta to New Delhi, and that of Turkey from Constantinople to Ankara, so the symbolic location of Westville went a very long way to telling us that the former Vice-Chancellor of the University of Natal, and we must not forget that that is what he was, that the former Vice-Chancellor of the University of Natal meant to establish a new institution. I do not think that the merger of UDW and the University of Natal in itself was as traumatic as it has been made out in certain quarters. But what I think was traumatic was the fact that we had the double imperative of introducing transformation and massification at the same time. Many still believe that the two are impossible to combine, that they are a contradiction in terms. In my opinion, that is actually not the case. I do not think that the college system or the lack of skilled functionaries in certain sections of our university, and there are sections that do need looking at, that I do not think that was as a product of transformation. I think that the massification is a problem, that volume is a problem, a practical problem, but in my opinion, that is a manageable problem with a little bit of innovative thinking. Transformation and the merger has tended to be seen in terms of race. And I'm not talking about the people that are in this room who are largely managers and leaders. I'm talking about the ground troops out there. I think, however, that it is more that old bugbear of nationalism that has been the problem, or cultural nationalism, if you want to use that phrase. And there were, and there still is to an extent, three forms of nationalism in our university. There's Indian nationalism, which was certainly a very important factor in the UDW saga. We live in KwaZulu-Natal. It would be amazing if there wasn't a form of Zulu nationalism here, and I don't mean in Kata when I use that term. But the most important form of nationalism, and the key in the opposition that has existed in the transformationary period, has been, in my opinion, white liberalism, which I see as a form of nationalism, and which, be it through the exchange list, and no one has dared mention that today, be it through the exchange list, the internet chat thing, or from some of the denizens of our Pietermaritzburg campus, that there was a core of opposition from this quarter to Professor Makgoba. And I say that, in my opinion, as a statement of fact, not as a statement of opinion. Fikile was talking over lunch there, and it reminded me that Human Resources once tried to produce figures to illustrate that the senior established academics at UKZN had jumped ship, had left. And of course it was common corridor discussion that the cream had gone, the cream of the crop had gone, the white intellectuals had jumped ship. And that those who hadn't jumped ship couldn't get a job. Look, you have to look at that, you have to break that down. There's no doubt about it, there is no question about it, that there were some who picked up some very nice jobs out there and who used the discontent about the executive as a useful exit strategy. Very nice thing to say in cocktail parties in Cape Town. But, and this is a particular bugbear of my own, but there were those, and I wasn't actually convinced about this list that Fikile and I were talking about of, I can't remember how many academics. HR did a survey of those who had left, and basically the survey said that there was nothing abnormal in this, that this, if you looked at patterns, this is the sort of exit rate that we would normally have. That was true, and it wasn't true. It was true that people did leave, and it was true that some people did leave because they didn't like what was going on here. They were unhappy with what was happening at the University of Natal, and we mustn't forget that there were debates and fights in Senate at Natal long before there were debates and fights in UKZN Senate. So before and just after the merger, this was important. They did leave, but they did not forget, nor in some instances did they forgive. Indeed, many have all the classical hallmarks, I speak here as a historian, have all the classical hallmarks of the émigré. Remember in the French Revolution, after the Revolution, a great many French nobility, upper middle class folk fled to England, and they were called as a group the émigré. And they have all the classical hallmarks of the émigré. They are exiles from what they regard as their home. They are still connected to this university spiritually. They still maintain contact with this university. They are fervent in their opposition to the dispensation. In 40 years, and next year will be the 40th year since I first got a university job, In 40 years, I've never witnessed a phenomenon like that. And any history that will be eventually written about this university cannot leave out this exodus, this diaspora. You know, they talked at one stage about the University of Johannesburg being our 6th campus because there were so many people there. Could transformation have been dealt with differently so that this element could have been better accommodated and wouldn't have gone into opposition? Could it have been handled differently? Well, the answer is, of course it could. Anything can be handled differently. Any form of government you can change. But make no mistake about it, the transformation